Well, James Gunn fucked up my last video. This is a follow-up to my last video discussing how Black Adam saved the DC universe, where I will build upon these criticisms and high hopes as well as my point of view during said video and time period. Many of you will no doubt question why I still have it up on your channel if Henry's return is not happening at all, which was admittedly a big crux in its entirety. But, like I said in the pinned comment of that video, it isn't purely Cavill-centered despite how big his part was. And that a lot of very compelling points were brought up about Warner Bros, DC, superhero franchising, and Black Adam that I think you should all listen to. I'll link it down in the description. Not only will this be a follow-up, but now this time we will also be discussing the horrendous mishandling and betrayal of Henry Cavill's Superman and James Gunn's unfortunate tone-deaf moronic decision to recast and utterly fire the poor guy from his most iconic role. You can tell by the overwhelming reaction on Twitter that this was a really bad call. The timing only makes it worse, which I'll elaborate later on. I will be reflecting on Henry's career as the Man of Steel from the very start till now. Before we dive in, of course please listen to what I have to say to the very end. Also check out my socials including my Twitch and my all links in the description down below, and like and subscribe for more in-depth content like this. Make sure to comment your own thoughts in the comment section below or shoot any suggestions for what I should make a video on in the near future. I do indeed read them all and take from what you all have to say, it does not go unnoticed. Also, make sure to stick around to the very end for a big surprise. Man of Steel was the first movie into the introduction of the DC cinematic universe, Superman being the focus character of the film, where we were subjected to his beginnings and the nuance of being an alien from another world, a god amongst people. A film that did a realistic case study on Superman, which was supposed to spread into many films, with each one being a step into his journey, something we ultimately didn't get. This darker, more realistic spin was foreign to the character of Superman in mainstream media. People did not like this at the time, as I mentioned in my Black Adam video, but over time began to appreciate the depth of this layered narrative, Mr. Cavill's portrayal as both the more grounded Clark and Superman, and of course the insane spectacle that honestly feels like a realistic adaptation of a Dragon Ball Z fight brought to the big screen. As I said in my previous video, whether you like him or dislike him is besides the point. Henry Cavill is Superman. His performance and role is forever iconic in the starting of the verse that spanned over a decade and is integral to DC as a whole and the fans who no doubt agree that he is arguably the most important character in the verse, with Batman being the close second. This is even confirmed in the overarching narrative as well as in multiple films such as Batman vs Superman, both versions of the Justice League movies, where they go out of their way to stress the importance of the Man of Steel's presence in the world, and at the end of Black Adam. I will get into the post-credit scene of Black Adam much later. We saw a more in-depth beginning of his upcoming and place in the world, an aspect that no one has ever touched upon or was at the very best covered insanely briefly in the typical Superman movie depiction. A powerful godly figure confined to real-world issues weighing on him heavily, the debate whether he should intervene in certain situations or not with his identity, with his characteristics showing he did want to do the right thing impulsively as a young kid but was scrutinized as his parents knew the kind of backlash his presence to the world would do. We even see this as he has a panic attack in one of the earlier scenes, with his powers developing with age. Other instances showing his anger almost breaking his composure when getting bullied. A worldwide bombardment was the last thing he needed, juggling the morality of it all constantly throughout the entire movie. His homeworld Krypton is also given more cinematic light, and is a medium to explore philosophical morals of inherent humanity, the importance of choice and free will, and is reflective of grand idealization, General Zod and his endeavors representing that perfectly. It is also presented as a hurdle for Clark, as for once he has found others to reconcile within his distinctness, and of course being the closest he has to bonds and blood. Questioning his humanity, parental expectations from both fathers, whilst having his own perspective going through a journey as Clark Kent throughout a good portion of the film, where all the little moments add up in his own decision making which abides by everything he has been taught. And of course the conflict of choosing which world to save. The burning question of his adopted world or the biological other, where he wouldn't feel like an outcast and learn of his people. Making the ultimate choice of his real people on Earth, inspiring hope when all looked hopeless, while sitting with the realization he killed the last of Krypton and Zod in the climax of his birth world truly gone for good. Legitimate consequences. Speaking of consequences, people love to ignore the nuance and the fact that this iteration of Superman is clearly a character study of his beginnings, his fucking origin, where he is obviously going to be inexperienced, impulsive, reckless, and emotional. We see this throughout the film with each instance of good and bad, such as breaking from his isolation, establishing genuine connections, learning self-discovery, and finding more about his purpose in this world as he changed for the better, showing even people as powerful as him are capable of fault, which grounds him to humanity and how we are all capable of mistakes. I honestly find his arc to be pretty compelling in the grand scheme of things, as we've never seen this side of Superman before, where he isn't perfect in everything he does, actually being flawed, and as ridiculously OP as he is, cannot simply overpower every battle as shown best in the Ultimatum with Zod's life. People often criticize the pacing of the film and depiction of Superman himself, believing they should have adhered to more of a Reeves-type origin and style. With bright campy visuals and characteristics instead of Snyder's much more serious depiction where the childhood of Clark is covered much more briefly in isolated instances to reflect the protagonist's moral dilemma at the time and scenes of present adult Clark Kent playing into his final choices of the film. Man of Steel is a more gritty, layered take on the typically one-dimensional goody two-shoes interpretation that prior Superman films have propagated to the mainstream, and it's very confusing to see people rip on this movie with common parroted claims like Superman is depressing, more color, blah blah blah, nothing like the cartoons and of that sort. Again, do people not realize that this is his origin movie? You can't just spawn into his peak, to his highs, his fame, his years of experience and confidence and bravado being Superman. Starting from Z-Day makes no sense. Yeah, there are some pretty heavy concepts and depressing moments, but that's to highlight Superman's initial struggle and change for the better with mistakes made along the way. It presents thought-provoking questions that would be true if a powerful figure like that existed in a real-life setting. It challenges the viewers of these hard-hitting truths and how people would actually react to an alien being amongst us. No funny sus man intended. Zack Snyder helped pioneer this nuanced take on the what if it went wrong with a world involving a Superman-like figure. Something to give the audience to think about that isn't just the same retelling of the cartoon or an older comic iteration of the Man of Tomorrow. If there had been a lighthearted reenactment of surface level fanwant and just Superman being as flat as thin paper with a smile on his face constantly, saving Metropolis from insert random villain of no one dying at all, it would have got torn to shreds. I honestly believe these quote-unquote criticisms are for the most part baseless, if not straight up unwarranted bias to Marvel or something with those little zingers as cope. Like, have these people actually seen a fucking Superman fight? Collateral damage is almost always present, and Superman wasn't as flawless in his execution as he was fresh to being a superhero. Literally his first time. The Kryptonians were the first individuals to actually give him a run for his money, and the technology they implemented was causing massive amounts of unavoidable destruction. Also, keep in mind how realistic this fight is, with Superman having borderline no martial arts training at this point, fighting a warrior who does, and was built for this. And that said person he is battling with, verbatim said he will involve the humans no matter what. He was not only battling freehold Kryptonians, but he also had to deal with the machines terraforming the planet. This is why Zack then later dives into that small-minded perspective from the view of Batman, seeing it in Batman vs Superman. Superman was forced into this situation whether you want to admit it or not, while also killing the one person alive at the time where he could relate to, as he didn't know a single Kryptonian. Prior to the encounter, he literally surrenders himself for humanity's sake, showing his kindness and love for this world and life, and again, didn't chase battle or conflict till the entire world's destruction was revealed by General Zod. To say Man of Steel isn't laid, even in this sense, shows you weren't paying attention to the movie. It's honestly comical at this point, but I guess hahaha, Superman destroyed big building, people die as if it were intentional. Yeah man, the character having a mental dilemma on taking a singular life and Zod totally destroyed a city worth of people for fun intentionally. It's so silly. As for the fights, I don't get why some people didn't like it. It's fucking amazing. It's pure spectacle on the grander scale. You feel the weight and momentum of each godly strike and how insanely fast these characters are, especially in combative situations. My earlier comparison to a realistic Dragon Ball Z fight fits this perfectly. It's just epic. And don't get it twisted, I do know Superman is a pretty joyful, optimistic hero and will do everything to not cross the lines for the most part, but that's in the comics, where he's in his latter career as a full-fledged hero. They were building up to that. Man of Steel 2 and other follow-up intended sequels that meant we would have reached there eventually, but as we all know, Warner Bros. Cut Zack Snyder of those aspirations because short-sighted public backlash made them crack under pressure. And when all seemed hopeful after such a long, depressing time, James Gunn swiftly came in and buried the prospect of letting Henry Cavill shine as the version of Superman most, if not all, people wanted. Just imagine if in the first Iron Man or Captain America movie, they started from the top. Right from the get-go, being perfect and awesome with no issues at all. See how ridiculous that sounds when saying that out loud? We wouldn't have seen them grow in their introductory movie and see their flaws. You know, the stuff that makes characters and their world around them compelling and interesting. And I'll probably get hit with the, why bring Marvel up? Where's the relevance? Well, my friend, the relevance here is that Marvel no doubt plays a part in every DC movie, and saying otherwise is straight ignorance. They are staples of superhero franchising. the innovators to the connected cinematic universe formula that's so heavily sought after these days. Every DC movie will be compared to Marvel one way or another to the end of time, and most, emphasis on most people who don't like Man of Steel, typically fall under blind Marvel fanboyism. I know that sounds cringe, but there's a lot of truth to it, so I made that analogy so you can all understand. I really do like Marvel myself anyways, but back to Superman. Man of Steel no doubt has its issues. It's far from perfect. Like for instance, some scenes are contrived and characters meeting up do not feel natural at all. Take Clark and Lois as a prime example. Very convenient, and much more I get into a separate video. But when it does shine, oh boy, it's fucking bright. From the humanization of Superman, the clever symbolism, his history and struggle and otherworldly battle with impeccable visuals, and finally, and especially, the cherry on top that is Hans Zimmer's infamous soundtrack that he composed for the film that's honestly a mwah chef's kiss. It is a great introduction to the character of Superman, someone that has barely got an intriguing death and media representation and was a strong stepping stone to follow up and build upon. We all know how that turned out. Regardless though if you believe Man of Steel is great, good, average or shit, you cannot deny the fact that Henry Cavill and his portrayal of Superman was the one to kick off DC's cinematic universe. This is very important. To make another quick Marvel example you no doubt will get, it is the equivalent if they had only released Iron Man 1 and had him cameo in other films instead of getting his 2 follow-ups with his character up in the air and if RDJ will play him or not, only to find out he is getting recasted after 1 month of his return being publicly announced after waiting for so long. Could you imagine that? Someone else aside from Robert Downey Jr. playing Iron Man? Especially before reaching the peak of their character, shafting the one to start the entire verse and all to come? It's the same case for Henry Cavill as Superman. I am honestly dumbfounded that people are defending this outlandish short-sighted decision. Man of Steel 2 was slated initially, which would have been the smart move in all honesty, with other separate films dedicated to characters like Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash and so on, where their next appearance would make much more sense with them all being established in this at the time new verse. It's not like they would shove them all into one movie, right? Right? Batman vs Superman. I do not consider this a solo Man of Steel sequel. It is more of a weird Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman hybrid film. Oh and yeah, the Justice League are there too, with special guests Lex Luthor, Alfred Pennyworth and fucking Doomsday! Did I mention this was the second film of the DC Cinematic Universe? So much crammed in, and it's all thanks to Warner Bros trying to catch up and rush to where Marvel was at. It's so bad in hindsight. Honestly, I'm surprised it even made sense of how much was introduced and tackled in this movie. The film opens up with Batman in his origin story, then proceeds to follow Bruce Wayne's perspective. Superman is relegated as the focus due to his city-wide scale actions in Man of Steel, known as the Black Zero event, and the event that transpired in Africa where he rescues Lois Lane. There is a brief montage of him saving people in silence, followed by the world openly scrutinizing Superman with constant debate as he's become a character of controversy. The rest of the movie, at least in the theatrical cut, focuses on Batman's reasoning, Lex Luthor's grand plan, and Lois's investigation, with Clark Kent barely participating except in a few scenes as the one where he meets Bruce Wayne, isolates himself from the world after the court scene, talks to his mother on what he should do, and you can't forget him hopping in the bathtub. The court scene is where he's given most to do, aside from the title fight itself, which is short-lived but cool and hype regardless. You really get to see Superman at his lowest in this film in all aspects, exploring the themes presented in Man of Steel on a grander scale, and even tasting defeat by the hands of Batman. It is very realistic again on how the world would view a Superman if he were to actually exist. After Batman and Superman call it a day on trying to rip each other's heads off, then do we really get to see Superman let loose, and boy does he let loose. Henry Cavill's Superman's action has always been top notch and it really does deliver in this fight against Doomsday, with the choreography being stunning from start to finish, displaying these godly feats of power so effectively, feeling the weight of it all. And things were going so well up to that point until, spoilers, Superman fucking dies. Taken out of the equation for many years. No Man of Steel 2. I just feel so bad for Henry Cavill. It only gets worse. Justice League. Wow. Where do I begin? Superman in 2017's version of Justice League is done so horrendously bad that it is a total disservice to the character of fucking Superman, the previous 2 films including his character arcs, and Henry Cavill. It is such a leap in every facet, it's hard to explain how disappointed I was whilst watching it for the first time. Every scene with him feels like a joke, clearly holding Henry Cavill's acting ability back, with recession in quality of character in Superman as well. There's even scenes where he's doing voice lines in post that's so jarringly obvious and gives it such a cheap choppy feel, which is almost as bad as the obnoxiously cartoonish soundtrack in the background going on throughout the entire movie that couldn't touch the masterpiece that is Hans Zimmer's Man of Steel score. We can't also forget the CGI mustache debacle, which makes Henry Cavill look like a memeable goofball and is just as distracting, thanks to Mr. Joss Whedon, who wanted to give us a total sudden 360 for Superman's direction and actions as a character as if no one with a thinking brain would notice. I can't stress enough how bad of a decision this really was. We open up Justice League with CGI Man being asked corny ass questions, eliminating the impact of his death in Batman vs Superman. Did I forget to mention that this movie is presented as if Zack Snyder directed it? It's shown in both the opening and end credits that Zack Snyder directed it, which couldn't be farther from the truth. The Snyder Cut is living proof for anyone who doubts that. Anyways, after Superman is shown alive and well, then does it cut to Batman and his shenanigans, which segues into Superman's death being shown in a montage dedicated to him with sad music playing. His logo being plastered all over the world as a mourning tribute, which doesn't make sense of why the sudden shift in focus to the loss of him right after showing him to be alive. And don't give me the, oh well, that was before his death, blah 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 crap, as even if it was, which I doubt, it still alludes to him coming back heavily. Even if we were to entertain the idea of it being prior to the events of his passing. It makes little to no sense in the consistency and the continuity of the film and gives major tonal whiplash from happiness to depressed in an instant. For the majority of the film, he is barely present. It isn't until the mother box of man is retrieved that the idea of resurrecting Superman is entertained off a whim, seemingly coming out of nowhere with no real emotion behind the prospect of reviving a staple character, especially with his magnitude and presence and the impact he holds in his verse. They dig up Superman's grave in such a joking, disrespectful manner, which is ironic to the current circumstances of today. You could even say it's foreshadowing on how Henry Cavill would end up getting treated, digging him up just to put him back 6 feet under again. The revival scene had no impact at all, and there ensues the reshot battle between him and the Justice League, with that CGI lip be sticking out. Yummers. The change dialogue is horrendous. Like, what the fuck is this?
Tell me, do you bleed?
Superman then flies to his childhood home where more cringe dialogue ensues, really limiting what Henry Cavill is capable of as an actor, with the cherry on top being that lip once again. The scene is physically off-putting. I absolutely have no idea how and why Joss Whedon allowed it to be in the final cut. Now, at the climax when all seems lost, here comes Supes with the infamous Justice line, looking really bad. They changed the initial look for a more bright campy suit, which isn't the worst thing, just something to point out being visually inconsistent to Batman vs Superman and Man of Steel, which is drastically noticeable. But what is the worst thing is his again CGI mouth and god-awful dialogue, which I can't stress enough how corny and laughably bad it is. This goes with most of the other characters too. Superman ultimately being a foreign character to the one shown in Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman, it makes no sense. Everything that was going for Cavill's iteration as Superman just melts away with this movie. All of his depth, growth, and nuance just gone like that. I guess he's the 90s animated Superman now? The final battle being completely lopsided when he joins in, adding the Flash to help save civilians, jokingly calling him a slowpoke, which is hilarious, and ends up showing off by lifting a big building. Wow. Which was always confusing to me. I was always under the impression they all ran out. We see this when the family drives off, with civilians running in the background out of every building. But I guess not? Either that or Mr. Whedon loves forgetting continuity, which in all honesty, would be consistent to his character, unlike this fucking movie. After that, and giving CGI Wolf the smackdown, he ends up with Cyborg to rip the mother box, something capable of forever changing and damaging the world as is, but can't help but make a wisecrack like he's fucking Spider-Man. They succeed in separating it, then he makes more jokes. Yippee! They do the group pose for the gram and look at the view. The movie ends with Clark doing the infamous symbol reveal. Henry Cavill wouldn't be shown on screen till 4 whole years later. Still no Man of Steel 2. But here's the kicker, it was for the original cut of Justice League. So it's not anything really new in terms of material we haven't seen before. And what I mean by that is as a new movie opportunity. Because you could say all day long that this is a new different movie, which I agree in the sense that it's different from the original, really different, but it's still the same movie if you catch my drift. Superman is still only in it briefly, close to the climax of sequences that we've seen before with slight alterations and new scenes which I do think are way better, but it's still unfortunate for Henry Cavill, as he's not given another new film appearance even after all this time. There is also a cameo in the post-credit scene of Shazam, where Billy Batson shows up to his school with Superman, except it's not Henry Cavill, it's just a body double. Warner Bros. And DC really have it out for this poor man. The scene required the character of Superman, yet didn't include Henry. You know, the guy who fucking plays Superman? Anyways, back to the Snyder Cut of Justice League. It opens up with the death of Superman, giving his sacrifice much more significant weight and importance than the 2017 version, while setting up the tone for the rest of the film. His screams echoing throughout each box location, better establishing effective world building from one starting sequence alone. He again isn't present for most of the movie, but in an isolated viewing of the film with no prior information of how things transpired in the 2017 Justice League, this is actually much more wisely done with purpose, making his reveal more impactful with no foresight of him coming back as done jarringly obvious in Joss's version. The prospect of Superman's revival this time was done right and felt meaningful. From the tension of the idea to the visuals of seeing the man start it all off rise in the hologram and the score all working and making us feel the importance of Superman. The grave retrieval scene was also not treated as a joke and was a good way to bring our characters closer whilst having the dignity of Superman still intact, with even the Flash calling him his hero. We even see the idea of the future injustice-esque world when ultimately the more serious and patient resurrection begins. Building upon that concept shown in Batman vs Superman, not forgetting that plotline, seeing how dangerous and evil Superman can be and what the world would look like without the one we're accustomed to. A much more serious battle ensues when he is awakened, being calmed in the same manner. Clark quickly rekindles with Lois and reunites with his mother, then ventures off to a setting closer to his home world in the Kryptonian ship. He has been reawakened, and walks alongside the many costumes of significance whilst the most important lessons of his life are being recounted with each step looking as he goes along the way, with the score further accentuating the nostalgia and chills finally seeing Henry Cavill back, as he looks at the perfect suit representative of his second chance, donning the iconic black suit from the Death of Superman storyline showing change via the visuals. It then transitions into the scene of him walking out of the open doors, which is a shot-for-shot callback to Man of Steel. He then walks out in his new costume and takes flight as he once did, this time with more experience, contempt with the choices he has made, and there being no confusion or doubt this time. The entire scene is done masterfully. The acting is top notch here and just shows us more why Henry Cavill is Superman. He joins the battle as it looks hopeless with one of the coldest lines.
Not impressed.
Superman turns the tide of the original action as intended, where you feel the weight of each blow, not bloated out by the music or taken out from the experience by the horrible dialogue. Everything here is done so well. Pounding on Steppenwolf, beating him senseless until Barry fails. After the Flash undoes the damage in an incredible sequence that blew me away when I first saw it, giving me actual chills, then does Superman and Cyborg separate the unity of much more at stake, feeling the severity of the situation. Doing so successfully, Steppenwolf is taken care of, with Superman delivering a wallop of a punch to send him back off to Apocalypse, minus a body courtesy of Diana. Darkseid steps on his skull, ticked as Superman and the rest of the Justice League stand their ground as a team, eyeing the Ancient God down, almost in a you can't do shit, try me fashion. Now that's my fucking Superman. The movie continues as they do the pose right this time, flowing perfectly of what happened in this iteration of the movie, feeling much more emotional and deep as it's an achievement and sign of growth from the prior events in this film and the DC cinematic universe as a whole. It ends with Superman doing his iconic symbol reveal, but this time with a black suit, followed by the Nightmare sequence showing him as the godly threat he truly is, being once again consistent with the plot threads established by Batman vs Superman. By this point, it was unknown what was going to happen with the DC Cinematic Universe's Superman. Henry Cavill was being vocal about putting back on the cape, but it seemed that it wasn't in DC's interest. They rubbed salt in the wound of anybody who adores their Man of Steel, by having him as a shadowed figure cameo in Peacemaker, where again, just like Shazam, Henry's character is reduced to a body double, a fucking unlockable character. This would be the first instance of James Gunn personally doing Mr. Cavill dirty and wrong. We now fast forward to the year of 2022, and whispers come out. Henry is returning, or so they say. The Rock was to make his debut in the DC Universe's Black Adam, the strongest in this world, but he oddly kept emphasizing this world, not others. This led to heavy speculation that Henry Cavill's Superman would appear in Black Adam, with Dwayne Johnson stroking the flame subtly to glaringly obvious when teasing curious reporters near the film's release date. The DC fandom were going nuts at the idea of Henry Cavill returning in a new film. People even really wanted to see Black Adam and Superman throw down. The film drops, and to everyone's surprise, Henry Cavill came back from the shadows. Superman returns. Not only did Superman return, but it was heavily alluded to the prospect of those two beings of unfathomable grand otherworldly powers clashing, ending on a cliffhanger. You know, the ones that are supposed to get you hooked on what comes next. An announcement swiftly followed by, Man of Steel 2 is happening, Henry Cavill is back as Superman, with actual promotion of Man of Steel, which they had previously tried to act like it didn't exist and sweep under the rug. Henry Cavill shows his passion and love for the role by dedicating an entire post in relevance to his return, and you can just see the absolute joy in the guy. He loves playing Superman. The Rock admitted publicly that he fought for Henry to come back, clearly seeing the importance and impact his portrayal had and would have had in future movies, appealing to the cries of millions wanting him back in the suit. All seemed good, a little too good, with everything seemingly on track. A clear path for the future of DC movies seemed obvious for once. It seemed as if they were finally void of Marvel jealousy and were ready to set things right in their own way. Henry Cavill, after 1 month of his return, is fired. After doing a promotion run on how he was excited to return and play a justifiably more optimistic Superman with the possibility of potentially even working with Snyder once more. All of that hope, interest and excitement gone, just like that. A cruel bitter end to the Superman we know and grew with. Henry Cavill was done immensely wrong. They betrayed him, which is financially not a smart move, especially with the cult-like following Henry Cavill would have brought to DC, and Man of Steel 2 would have done numbers. And it also makes James Gunn look bad, as the timing of it all was horrible. This man left his role as Geralt with Rivia to pursue Superman. He was doing his own thing, finding contempt, but DC led him to be Superman again, only to stand him up at dinner and to find out there's someone new. Yes, there were behind the scenes reasons for him leaving The Witcher, but you are lying to yourself if you say reprising his role as Superman wasn't a massive incentive behind his career decision making, leaving one role to lose another, without even getting a chance to shine at all, committing to a company that again disrespected him and played him like a fool. You could also tell there was most likely an honourable reason for Henry Cavill to come back, for the fans, and do right by them. DC killed Superman, again, but this time it was James Gunn that pierced a symbol of hope. The reason is mind-blowingly dumb on its own. It shows where DC's and Gunn's prerogative is at. They want to do an entire clean slate for DC movies. But the problem is that it is far too late to do so, and it is dumb to suddenly think that people will act as if they suddenly forgot about everything to do with the DC verse that already exists. Henry Cavill's being the worst case of it being publicly acknowledged. This hasn't been the first time he was replaced, as they announced a new Superman film with a total recast on Henry Cavill's birthday back in 2021, which just shows you how much DC cares about Henry Cavill. People will be quick to rush to Gunn's aid and be like, it's because they're rebooting and they can't use a previously established character, and to those who say that unironically, let me tell you this. If you think James Gunn isn't going to reuse Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn again like he did in the pseudo reboot of Suicide Squad, then you are blind. I know for a fucking fact he's going to use that version of Harley Quinn again. I guess he just has a bias towards Margot Robbie? I will bet you my whole house we will see her again in the new DC reboot verse. Which, let's talk about that. They are going for the reboot route. You know what that tells me and every other DC fan? They buckle under pressure. They are short-sighted and cannot think long-term and cannot handle a non-financial hit. They are chasing the Marvel high again. Starting at square one, destroying anything remotely interesting, redeemable, and exciting for the future, pretty much making the whole DC cinematic universe a waste of time in retrospect. Now, no doubt will people bring up this tweet on the screen here as a counter to insinuate they are not rebooting the entire verse, just the Suicide Squad. Well, no, that's wrong. Henry Cavill is getting recasted, he's not a part of the Suicide Squad, so I don't know what people are getting at by saying this. Even if we were to entertain the idea of the tweet, it would make no legitimate sense, since that would imply previous existing characters and new ones will interact even though they've engaged with the prior versions of themselves, so it's false to claim that. Gunn is definitely going the clean slate reboot route. That is how insecure DC got, that they threw their own verse in the garbage bin. What they don't know is that by this decision they are still digging themselves deeper in the ground and reaffirming everybody's criticism of the company. The Rock and others before Gunn's arrival were actually beginning to find their own footing. We had The Batman, which was a big hit, and Black Adam setting things up amazingly for anything new DC universe to come, moving past their old mistakes of their characters we love and their journeys we watched finally about to kick into second gear with a focus on the original trio of Batman, Wonder Woman and Superman. They were going to get their chance to shine and who knows what else. But I guess we'll never know. Thanks Gunn, thanks DC. This just proves a good director does not inherently equal a good movie or direction. James Gunn paints this perfectly. I initially thought he was going to do right by these characters and storylines, but his clear disrespect and firing of Henry Cavill and the erasing of the DC movie universe proves otherwise. I'm not taking back what I said. James Gunn typically does make good movies, the Guardians being one of my absolute favorites, but just because he's good at Guardians of the Galaxy doesn't mean he's good at Superman or any other project. The Guardians of the Galaxy are characters and stories tailored to his style. The same case can be argued for the Suicide Squad, but that's always going to be the case, and no matter how stellar your movies are, it does not excuse any criticism when you do mess up. Taking us back to square one was always going to be a bad move. Even in Peacemaker, he showed how much he really cares about the original members of the Justice League and Superman. Now, is there a chance this new Superman movie is going to be good? Sure, of course there is. But disregarding a decade of built canon and others' hard work, time, and effort is just in reality a bad move. Especially to the person who started the very first. The pioneer of the cinematic universe that James Gunn wouldn't be a part of if Henry Cavill didn't exist and contribute the way he did. Henry Cavill's Superman is universally recognizable. People worldwide could point a picture at Henry Cavill and tell you that is Superman. That's how far he's reached even without a Man of Steel 2. Think about that. The timing of the whole ordeal is also pretty ridiculous. They pulled a no-show at the very last second after getting everyone's excitement and trust again. We got a Wonder Woman, Shazam, Suicide Squad, and a fucking Aquaman sequel before Man of Steel 2. You know, one of the most iconic superheroes of all time. Henry Cavill gave his heart, body, and soul to this role. Being a part of this wild roller coaster for close to an entire decade would have happily continued. He didn't even get a chance to shine and show everyone what he's truly capable of, apart from a film of origin. Every other instance were either a disgusting reshoot smearing his reputation by limiting his capabilities as an actor and his character as a whole, or a heavily studio-interfered movie, again not looking out for the character or the narrative's best interest, or brief scenes in a 4-hour film, and finally relegated to body doubles and a tiny instance of redeemable hope in a post-credit scene. DC mishandled this character for many years with their out-of-touchness and hard-on to be Marvel beat for beat, and ultimately betrayed him when he wanted to set it right after all the smoke had cleared. They not only destroyed the hopes and aspirations of Henry Cavill, but the fans as well. Speaking of fans, I've honestly got to say DC fans are the most indecisive fandom I've ever seen. It's like you're praying for your own downfall of celebration of these wild decisions. Are you not a DC fan? This just shows they can erase an entire cinematic universe in an instant off an insecure whim, and most of you are okay with that and praising the insanity of it? I've just seen so much idiocy after idiocy online of them not knowing what they actually want. They fan cast a new Superman every 2 seconds with people who do not fit at all. I've unironically seen people entertain the once horrible idea of a 71-year-old Michael Keaton playing the main Batman, which is just silly. If it isn't impulsive fanfiction quality plotlines they're proposing, it's inserting random actor that would like to play an already established character who's already being played by an ongoing actor, or, for instance, celebrating Black Adam's financial downfall. Like bro, why are you going against your own team? Does it really bring you joy to see something you support and watch religiously fail? It's so skewered. They could honestly announce Kevin Hart is playing Batman tomorrow, and I swear to God, I bet I'd find DC fans unironically supporting it and making it way deeper than it needs to be. This also applies to Snyder cultists and Matt Reeves loyalists. Why are you publicly fighting against each other? I guess a world without Henry Cavill Superman really does bring the worst out in all of us. DC and James Gunn have really fumbled the bag. DC is so out of touch. As an example, during the peak of fans wanting and demanding a reboot, they ignored it and doubled down with their intended verse. But when DC fans don't want a reboot for the franchise, they're like, you know what, let's reboot. I am seriously dumbfounded by everything that has taken place, and absolutely feel for Henry Cavill. He did not deserve this at all. His legacy as Superman is forever muddled by people who don't know what they're doing, and who have such a fixation on wanting to be Marvel in every way. To end things off, I'll finish this video with a quote from the Man of Tomorrow himself. It's not an S. On my world, it means hope.